Good. We don't have that kind of scenery in Delcom, Louisiana. All right, you guys. So if you remember from your first test, this is going to be a student-led guided review. So my job won't be to come up with examples. We've been doing examples for a long time. It's fine tuning, fine for you have questions, clarifications. Remember, I can't tell you if I will ask something because I haven't finished a test yet, but I can't answer, can I ask something? Like I had a student text me. I thought it was a really good question. Are we responsible to know the specific degrees of range of motion? And I was like, that's a good question. He said, no, I give you the degrees to give you a sense of the road you can travel, right? So when we're doing things like flexed and flexion and extension, I want you to at least know you have this many miles and this many miles. It's a reference so that you can visually kind of see the kind of positions and motions. But I'm not going to have you, what is the number of degrees? Because that varies within personal a little bit. So memorizing things, we have to memorize some things like words, but this is more about conceptualizing. Whether or not you remember the hip has X number of degrees isn't as important to me as if you know that this is a hyperextension of the hip. But it's a great question. So I can answer any of those kind of questions. Grace, do you guys have a review scheduled?
Yes, we're looking for the reviews tonight.
5:30, review tonight at 5. Awesome. Good times will be had by all. So that's a great place to get some extra practice. But today is about you guys making sure you have all your questions answered. And another thing too, I'll get off my soapbox. I'm trying to teach you guys, it's important to me to teach you how to analytically think and not trust. I say not trust it, but if something doesn't sit well or make sense, question it. Like he said internal rotation, but God, that just doesn't seem right. I could have misspoke. Like, like bring that up and we can clarify and I'll say, oh, you're right. I meant to say this. It's not that it's just example. I have a brother and sister, an older brother and sister, and my dad calls me my brother's name and my brother my name all the time. My brother will ignore my father if he calls him Brian. I won't. I know he's talking to me. Except one time when my dad called me my sister's name, that's when I had to speak up. I was like, Pop. Oh, shit, I'm sorry. So my point is that we misspeak sometimes. Instead of right, we say left. Instead of internal, we say external. So if it doesn't fit, you're like, what? I think that's internal based off of what I taught and what I studied. It could be. Sometimes we just misspeak. So trust that instinct. Okay. Who wants to break the ice with a question or a clarification? Okay.
Could you go over kind of like landmarks for the radial ulnar joint? I'm still kind of struggling with supination and pronation, the difference between them.
Totally understand. And that one's very tricky. Because one of the reasons I think it's tricky is I am unique in how I teach, but I think the landmarks are a good way to save ourselves from missing it, right? Because again, if all we've ever taught was supination, there's ways we can have supinals that aren't exactly in supination, right? So the concept is, if I'm in anatomical position, supine could be laying on your back, but it could also be facing forward as a means of supine. So in anatomical position, I am in a way supine because I'm facing forward. My radial ulnar joints are also supine. If I put, this is like Easter, every time I come back to class, it's slightly high. One time they hit the bones and back room. So this is the radius, right? This is the head of the radius. And the head of the radius, if you notice, it's round. I was taught in grad school, it's like a clock. You think about a clock, right? And so the radius in anatomical position is supine. Now, it's vertically supine, but we could also look at it from a different perspective, like it was laying down on its back. It's just as supine here as it is there, right? And the whole concept of pronation is going from a supine position to rolling over on your face, going prone. So if I took two black Sharpie, or if I took one Sharpie and drew two black dots to represent eyes, pronation would be going face down. Literally, that's the concept of motion. So supination is going back to supine. And the whole reason, I think this is kind of cool, the whole reason we call halfway semi-prone is position. We don't have semi-pronation. We don't have semi-supination. It's a position. It's a very functional position of grip and reach and work. The reason we call this semi-prone and not semi-supine is because you start supine. In other words, you have to have pronation to get there. You have to be prone. In fact, everything that's not supinated is a degree of prone. Just like in the elbow, everything that's flexed, or if you have flexion from anatomical, everything is a degree of flexed. There's only one degree of extended, and that's anatomical. So it's the exact same concept. Now, the fact that the wrist doesn't twist allows us these landmark cues. If the wrist could rotate in its transverse plane, none of this would work. But the fact that the wrist doesn't twist, we did that in class where I'm like, guys, try to spin your wrist in the transverse plane. It can't happen. This is your forearm. This is your radioulnar joint. So the fact that your wrist doesn't rotate in the transverse plane allows us to use our thumb almost like an extension of the radius. The thumb is always radial side. It can't not be radial side. So the analogy is if I'm the radius, this is the head of my radius. I like to look at it as you laying in bed and you're on your, let's say, to fit left, you're laying in bed and you're on the left side and your head is on your pillow. The radial head is on the pillow. And you wrap your body around your hugging pillow and your feet go from being on one side of the bed to flopping to the other side of the bed, but your head stays on the pillow. So being that the thumb represents your feet, when your head is always going to be lateral, but your feet may be medial. And that's the landmarks. When your thumb is lateral, your feet and your head are on the same side of the bed. But when your thumb goes medial, your head is still on the same side of the bed, but your feet are on the other side of the bed. And that's how you know that you're pronated. And a good rule of thumb for semi-prone is just simply, because if I'm fully prone, I can't go any further. Right? I can't, I'm at the end of my rope. If I'm fully supine, I can't go any further. I'm at the end of my rope. But if I'm halfway there, like we use this example in class, if I'm halfway there, I should be able to pronate and supinate from semi-prone position. So I could do an experiment. Yeah, that's about 90 degrees. Yeah, that's about 90 degrees. So that's how I know. If I was fully supine, I couldn't supinate from that position. And if I was fully prone, I couldn't pronate. So a good rule of thumb to see if you're semi-prone, landmark-wise, your thumb is going to be lined up with your bicep. But from a functional test, I should be able to pronate and supinate from. Semi-prone is you laying like sleeping on your side. So you're not necessarily sleeping on your back, and you're not fully sleeping on your stomach with your feet on the other side of the bed. You're like sleeping on your side. That answer that?
Yes.
So landmarks, thumb rule. Guys, nowhere, unless they thought of it on their own, the thumb rule was something I came up with because I'm a landmark. That's how I see things. And so I think that's easier to remember with these joint motions is internal landmarks, because the internal landmarks are always. The external global references are sometimes. I'd rather you guys learn the old times than the sometimes. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Well, so I'm sorry that you're clarifying.
Yes.
On examples, there was a picture of a manipulating hammer
Uh-huh,
like this,
yeah,
and on the review, we got it as supinated from its positioning, so that would be semi-pronated with it.
yeah.
And then, because it says one motion has to occur to reach its anatomical and guided information. But if it's semi-pronated, then it would be supinated.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's a great example of checking to see if it makes sense, right? So if that's not, I don't look at the practices. So if let me get Kendall, MVP class, Kendall. So if we are here, how we would communicate that is, what's my position? Well, this is anatomical, so I would be pronated, and then you'd say how many degrees, right? Semi-prone technically is when you're midway. So in other words, not everything in between is semi-prone. That would be too many semi-prone. That'd be like calling 50 different shades of red all red when there's candy apple red and there's, that's all enough. So if we're in a prone position, not necessarily semi-prone, but we are pronated 45 degrees, 40 degrees, whatever it is. And we say, what motion would have to occur for our radial ulnar joint to go back to anatomical? We would have to have supination because anatomical position is supinated. You're welcome. Now, in those instances, because again, we're not perfect. In those instances, and this is good practice, reach out to, send an email or a message in the group chat. Send an email to Grace, send an email to Emma, because there may be questions Grace wrote that Emma didn't, and there may be questions Emma wrote that Grace didn't. And so send hey guys, would you mind looking at this again? Because again, oh gosh, I said right when I should have said left, or I might have said internal when I might have said external. So we need you guys that. In fact, that's actually part of the learning experience, is not just to memorize things we give you, but to use logical thinking and say, well, this doesn't really make sense. Let me ask for clarification. And that's actually a good dopamine hit when you're like, wow, I saw it. I didn't just take the word for it. I saw it, and there was a miscommunication. Awesome. So that's good confirmation that you're thinking of things the right way. Anybody else?
The internal and external rotation,
Mm-hmm.
just like if you can go over that.
Go over the hip internal and external rotation. Okay. So the way I like to think of hip internal and external is when we're doing the cervical, I'm getting there, but I love to set precedent. When we have one of something, right and left is super easy because I can bend to the right, bend to the left, look to the right, look to the left. But when we have two of something, we can't have a right of the right, or a left of the right, or a left of the left, or a right of the right, because those would be different structures. The left of my right is the inside of my elbow, but the left of my left is the outside of my elbow. So we have concepts called medial and lateral, which are mirror concepts of each other, right? So that way, that same structures that are on the inside of my elbow are the same structures that are on the inside of my elbow. So we have medial and lateral, and they are mirrors of each other. Okay. Now that being said, I taught you the cheat codes for flexion, get you in the fetal, get you out of fetal. I taught you the cheat codes of ab and adduction, which is lateral flexion, that I'm going to eventually get into fetal, but just through a different road. And we call that ab and ad. The cheat code for internal and external rotation is, hey, Ken, spin your whole body to your right. Ken would spin this way. But if Ken was a femur, I couldn't tell Ken spin to your right because he is a right. So how would I say, hey, Ken, spin to the right of your right? I would say spin laterally. Hey, Ken, spin lateral. Now, lateral is the same as external. Those are synonymous. But Ken, rotate laterally, rotate externally. Mirror concept. Hey, Ken, spin to the left of your left. Because the right of my right and the left of my left are the same. Hey, Ken, spin laterally, spin externally, spin medially, spin internally. So it follows a very similar concept that if you asked a young child to spin to their right or spin to their left, they would do this. So it'd be the same thing. Hey, right hip, spin to the outside or spin to the inside. External, internal. The illusions can come from the fact that my elbow gets more into fetal anteriorly, but my knee gets more into fetal posterior. And that can create, see if I'm losing my balance as I approach 60. Oh gosh, then I'm 50. Yeah, 50. Got a second midlife crisis right there. So watch this. When I have the same rotation, my hand comes in, but my foot goes out. But it's the same spin. We use the height to explain this, how it may look different linearly, but it's actually the same thing rotationally. See how it's the same thing rotationally? So a lot of people will say, oh, hand comes in for internal, so when my foot comes in, that must be internal too. And that's not the case. My left hip in this case is still spinning laterally or externally. It's just when my knee is flexed, my foot goes along for the ride and gets in. That would be like saying, that would be like only looking, let's say this was external rotation, my right hip. External rotation. That would be like only looking at the bottom part. Don't look at that part. Just look at the bottom part and saying, oh, that must be internal. No. This comes in, that goes out. Like that's the whole concept of rotation, is that when you're spinning something, one side's going to go one way and the other side's going to go the other way. So you got to watch out for which side you're looking. But that's the concept of external and internal, is, hey, hip, spin laterally. And it also applies to the knee. It's the same thing. Hey, left knee, spin laterally. Hey, left knee, spin medially. And then you have the illusions that come with it. All of our joint motions are named after it looks like it's moving, and it is. Small pieces usually move about big pieces. But the human body, unlike bourgeois, bigger pieces can move about small pieces. In the lecture, that's why I said my friends that I had engineering classes with at Auburn hated human movement, because in their world, you didn't have to worry about what does it look like when the building moves about the door. So for us, external or lateral is the same as external or lateral. Start, finish, start, finish. I get to the same place. So those are the illusions you got to look for. That not everything that spins here is lateral. If I fix the femur and move the socket, this would be internal. Because it's impossible to change positions the same and not call it the same thing. It's impossible for me to say I started in Lafayette and I ended in Bro Bridge, but somehow I didn't travel east. Does that answer that question? It's a good question. Yes, please. Yeah, sure. This one, the hip is a difficult landmark concept, but the best landmarks to use for hip rotation would be, remember, basically the front of the pelvis. So we have our anterior, superior, and inferior iliac spines. So our hip bones, right? And then what I like to use is my patella, because you don't want to use the foot because the foot can disappear, right? We did that when I was kneeling, like you didn't have a foot as a reference. But the patella will always be, even though it's a separate bone, it will always be anterior to the femur. I'm going to give you a couple of landmarks here. But the patella is always going to be anterior to the femur. It's always going to be in the front. Does that make sense? The patella will always be in the front. So the patella could be a really good landmark to use. Now, me personally, I just use a cheat sheet. If the patella represents the front of my femur, then what I like to do is work that line to the middle of my femur, and then I'm planting a flag. You might have saw me do this in class. I'm planting a flag. I am making a landmark. It's like the femur's the longest bone in the body, right? So it's like landmark desert. There's nothing just jetting out, right? There's no cactus or anything. It's desert. So I'm locating the anterior, and then I'm planting a flag. And with that flag, I can then use as a reference of internal and external. That's how I. Do you have anything different or?
No, I was just like making up the patella, so normally like I would use that. So
Absolutely.
just like see whether or not, from inside to outside.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, because the patella, the negative of the patella is that because it, especially in flex, it gets really pulled in tight to your femoral groove. So sometimes it's hard, it's easier to get tricked and follow it and say, oh, it's still straight. In reality, though, it's lateral. Does that make sense? So if you were going to use the patella, maybe do a hybrid where you plant your flag on the patella. So that way, you don't say, oh, there's my patella and it's still in the front. When in reality, the patella rotated laterally. And so if you planted a flag on the patella, it would be out here. Does that make sense? So whether you plant your flag in the middle of the desert or plant your flag at the patella, it's a good reference. It's a good reference to use.
Can you go over upward and downward rotation of the scapula?
Absolutely. So the upward and downward rotation of the scapula is specifically, for the purposes of this class, specifically when I'm trying to help my humerus get rotationally to 12 o'clock over my head. So we need to separate reach in terms of like linear reach and rotational reach. Does that make sense? They work together, but we have to separate them for our understanding of what's going to help me get my clock hand up as high as I can to do things, and then separately from what can help get my clock a little bit high, right? So what I'm trying to differentiate is this. This from this, okay? I'm going to do that again. This is all shoulder. Glenohumeral joint, the shoulder joint, gets you about 120 degrees of 180. 180 globally, okay? So the glenohumeral joint's like, I can get you about right there. They have a word for that, y'all are going to learn in grad school, this, the glenohumeral scapular rhythm column, which is like a ratio of 2 to 1, 120 and 60 of a rotation. I want to teach you practically what's happening. So how can I get my clock hand here when my shoulder can't get my clock hand here? It's that my shoulder is going to get me to what it can get me, and then my scapula is going to upwardly rotate to help me get the rest. That's upper rotation of the scapula. So literally repositioning. And what sucks is that on my skeleton, my scapula is they're pinned. I can't independently move the scapula, so I have to create scapulae. With the plural of scapula. So just imagine, here's my socket, right? It's a cup. It's represented as scapula. So we elevation, depression, protraction, retraction. So what will happen is the shoulder will get me to about there. And then the scapula is going to upwardly rotate. Get me there. So downward rotation is, and that's why for our class, because I mean, some of this is like weird stuff, right? So I'm just trying to introduce you to it, and then you're going to develop it as you go along. But specifically, when the arm goes up, whether that's frontal or sagittal, whether it's flexion or abduction, to get my hand up, to get my arm over my head, my scapula is going to have to upwardly rotate. Literally repositioning the scapula, repositioning the socket. If it didn't, I would only get. So that extra global, and that's, I think in class, if you go back and watch the previous lecture, I give a practical example that if my arm is stuck at 90, I can get my hand higher by leaning my trunk. And some people may think I moved my shoulder. I didn't. My shoulder stayed at 90. I just got my hand higher by leaning my trunk. It's the same concept.
Going this way.
Absolutely. 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 Yeah, any time. And so that's how we're going to do it. When the arm goes up, the scapula is going to help reposition the socket. And when your arm comes down, the scapula is going to deposition. There are some people that have what we call frozen shoulder complex, where they'll have a lot of scar tissue that'll literally freeze the glenohumeral joint, and they can still abduct 60 degrees. But that's not coming from the shoulder joint. That's literally just the scapula doing this. And people are like, oh, look, you have this much abduction. But it's just the scapula doing the scapula things. But that's how we keep it simple, is that when I'm going to ask the elevation and depression, it's going to be like when the arms stay down. And when I'm going to ask the upward and downward rotation, it'll be like I might ask a flexion of the shoulder with what type of rotation of the scapula. So the flexion would go with the upward, the extension would go with the downward, the abduction would go with the upward, the adduction would go with. Does that answer that? And also, I don't know if this student is here. I'm not going to call you out. It was a great conversation we had about horizontal abduction, and a little light bulb came off that I wanted to share with you. So, I've been preaching, and yes, I have a trash bag on my foot. Did y'all notice that? So I find this helps my neuroma. I know I'm so weird, I'm so old. So my neuroma, if I put heat on it, it makes it feel better because the neuroma is lacking blood flow. And so when I heat it, it doesn't hurt as much. So I was like, what, those sweatsuits people put on for heat? So I basically gave my foot a sweatsuit. And it feels great. It looks horrible, but it's Halloween. And I'm like, I'm just trashing. I call it biomechanics, man. So back to my point. I've been preaching position change. And in this conversation with the student about horizontal, I was like, wow, I never thought to give you a position change to go horizontal. So I'm going to do that now. Horizontal abduction is when you go from being in a flexed position to being in an abducted position. Think about that for a second. It's impossible to go from being flexed to being abducted without traveling down the horizontal abduction route. Because what I'm not going to do is give you a position, I give you a question, I start here and I do this. If it's just those two changes, there's no way in the world I could say, nope, you should have known I did this. Yeah, no, I could do this to here and I could do this to this. But if you just go straight there from being flexed to being abducted, you had to travel down the horizontal abduction road. And vice versa. If you start out abducted and finished flexed, you had to travel down the horizontal abduction. So we still can have landmark position changes to go with our horizontal ab and abduction. So when you're studying some of those illusion things, use that as a reference. Well, I started flexed and I ended abducted. I had to travel down the horizontal road to get there. It's like a shortcut. So one second, I want to get something off my chest, not in a bad way. but there are certain things I can do with 24-hour office hours, clarify things all day long, work through some struggles with concepts all day long. What I can't do is, Dr. Campbell, can you look at all of my notes and see if I'm correct in all of that stuff? Because guys, I'm dyslexic. Reading is not easy for me. I'll be like, yeah, sure, let me look at it. So that's where, coming in person, I don't mind discussing it, but I don't want to be held responsible if my dyslexia doesn't pick up on something in your notes. So those kind of things, I kind of, it's tough for me to do.
I was just gonna ask if there was any particular landmarks for me, internal and external.
Yes, great question. So this one's actually, to me, easier to use the patella. Because when my knee is flexed, so what happens, if you notice, when your knee is extended, and well, not when it's contracted, but if it's loose, like if you're just laying down or sitting down, your patella can kind of float side to side, right? So you have it's actually a joint, patellofemoral joint. But when your knee is flexed, those tendons, the quad tendon and the patella tendon, so it's the same tendon, it's the same rope, and it passes. This is actually incorrect. I know they did it just as an example, but the actual tendon passes through the patella, like the patella lives inside that rope. So you have your patella tendon, you have your quad tendon. Those two tendons literally hold the patella inside that groove. So if you notice, when your knee is flexed, it's not going in. Okay, this is a great landmark. So instead of, I was about to spill some. Instead of using a flag in the middle of the femur when we're doing the hip, I love to use a flag right towards the front, because that's literally where the patella is now looking right at you. So I want to use patella as a reference, and I want to use, if done right, I can use my foot or ankle as a reference. What you want to make sure, though, is you want to make sure that there's not the inversion or the eversion. So patella or if you wanted to do that, I'm going to give you a couple of options. The foot is a great one when you're closed chain, because I can't cheat. Like my move with the foot, right? So you can see patella as a reference of foot and see that I'm externally rotated. When I'm not rotated and I'm in anatomical, those two landmarks line up. So in closed chain, using the patella, let's see if I can, in closed chain, using the patella and the foot as a landmark will show you external rotation real well. In other words, that's where I started. This is where I finished. I have to be externally rotated. If I'm doing internal, there's my patella, there's my foot. So closed chain patella as a reference to foot is a good reference.
So if in enclosed chain, if the foot is external to the knee or
To the patella. Yeah.
external.
Yeah. Yeah. If the foot is lateral. So it's the same rules. So let's say if you're off the ground, I'm not going to use the foot because my foot can invert and evert, and that might throw me off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same concept as planting a flag in the desert. I'm going to plant a flag on the middle of my shin, and I'm going to see internal, external roll. It's just really hard not to move your subtalar, but lateral rotation, medial rotation. Lateral rotation, just like the hip, spin laterally, spin medially. So it's the same thing. So when the foot is off the ground, I would use the middle of the shin as a reference. So that way you see lateral or you see medial. But when my foot is on the ground, you could use the foot because my foot is fixed from cheating or spinning or subtailoring openly. That might, get in the way of seeing it. So patella is a great reference, and the front of the shin is a great reference. And if I'm lateral, then I'm external. And if I'm medial, then I'm internal. You're very welcome. Good question.
And I want to make sure with that, the reason that it works is because there's no internal, external of the ankle or subtalar.
What a great clarification. Absolutely. So the ankle joint itself, we don't want to rotate in the transverse plane, right? We want to just allow the wheel to roll. If you have external rotation that happens in your ankle, you're having a high ankle sprain, right? So yes, that's exactly why that works. And also, we can't internally and externally rotate the knee if our knee is not flexed, right? So that also takes away our hip as being an illusion as well. Because when we're flexed, we can't have our hip rotating. That would be, external. I'm sorry, that's a right. So external, internal. We can't have the femur rotating in its transverse plane. So we don't have to worry about that. So all we looking at is this. So yeah, that's why our hip would be this.
Yeah.
Our foot would come up. It's a really good clarification. Yeah, if our ankle could rotate in the transverse plane, yeah, we'd have a whole new set of landmarks. I think it's cool though. It's similar to how the wrist doesn't twist in its transverse plane. The lower extremities version of why the ankle doesn't twist. Yeah, that slight, again, it's not the same, but it's that version. But the knee rotation would be the lower extremities version of the radial ulnar. Not the same. It's just the lower extremities version. I got some good questions. So 5:30 for the review in the computer lab or in here. 156 feet. BYOC, bring your own coffee. What about nobody asked any pelvic girdle stuff? Y'all are comfortable with that? Good. Take this test is going to be position and motion questions. Because the way I look at it is if you can do addition equations, then you know your numbers. I don't have to say what number is this, that's 9. If you're doing equations, then I know you know your numbers. So it's not that studying those foundational things weren't important. It's just, I'm going to see if you know them by asking you application questions. It's the staircase analogy on the first days at school. So the test is going to be heavy position and movement. I'd say emphasize more of, not that every question is going to be an illusion, but I'm not going to probably waste my time saying, like, that was first test stuff, right? More questions? Last call, all in, all done. Bueller. All right, if y'all are done with me, I'm going. Good questions, guys. Really good questions.